All right, I'll go ahead and start. I call to the order the meeting of the Personnel Committee on August 9th, 2023 at 4:02 p.m. The first agenda item is the approval of minutes. I need a motion to approve the May 10th, 2023 Personnel Committee minutes.
I move approval.
Approval made by Alder Jetzer. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Moving on to item 3, public appearances for non-agenda items. Is there anybody in chambers that would like to speak? Great. So we're going to go ahead and move on to agenda item 4A, Baker Tilly Organizational and Staffing Study, Presentation and Report. There's no action to be taken, it's just a presentation. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to Sarah or Rory.
Yeah, before Rory takes over the presentation, I just wanted to remind the Personnel Committee that in late 2022, we had sent in for our RFP for organizational review. We were looking for about a 3 to 5 year staffing plan, and also for the vendor to identify any organizational efficiencies that we might have in the city of Fitchburg. Rory and his team with Baker Tilly received the project and met with several, if not almost all, of our city staff and elected officials. In May, we were able to send a newsletter from Baker Tilly to city staff to kind of let you know what the timeline was. And then we received the final report just last week, so we sent that out to all staff. The city had an internal work team that consisted of City Minister Chad Brecklin, Finance Director Misty Dodge. We had our Senior Center Director Jill McCone, Economic Development Director Mike Zimmerman, and then myself. I just want to extend a great thank you to the internal work team for sharing their time on that report. Or not the report, but sharing their time with providing Baker Tilly with all of the information that you needed, everything from policies to budget information, handbooks, a lot of information. So a big thank you to Rory, Megan, Elliot, and Rachel for all your time on this report. We really appreciate you being here today. So I'd like to turn over to Rory to give a presentation.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. And actually, you took care of some of my content, so I'll get to skip through some stuff. Likewise, I'd like to extend a thank you to the internal project team. I mean, these projects are only successful when we have clients that are engaged in them, right? And don't just issue an RFP for the sake of issuing an RFP to get a report and stick it in a drawer. And the project team was definitely involved in the project throughout the process. Also, thanks to city staff that made time over the course of, I think it was 3 weeks, both in person and virtually, to meet with us. We met with anybody that was willing and able to meet with us over the course of that time. And I think, as Sarah mentioned, nearly everybody in the city was able to speak with us. So that is not common, I guess you could say. That is definitely unique to this engagement. So I do commend the city for not only, I guess, prioritizing the engagement, but prioritizing the messaging down to staff that they should prioritize it as well. So thank you. So quick agenda, project introduction, which Sarah did a great job of doing, so I won't kind of just reiterate everything that she said, but then we'll talk a little bit about our scope and methodology, talk some about recommendations, and then obviously a conclusion and some potential next steps. So project introduction wise, as Sarah mentioned, as a result of the city experiencing increasingly rapid growth and the desire to meet up with the high need or high, I guess, level of service delivery need, a study was initiated across all departments to really understand what staffing need to look like over 3 to 5 years and where some other potential efficiencies or inefficiencies might be found as a result of interviewing staff. In addition to this, as Sarah mentioned, we requested a whole bunch of data and analyzed a whole bunch of data, including data not just from the city itself. So we did peer benchmarking, which we'll get into here. So a considerable amount of data, organizational structure, org charts, technology, systems, peer benchmarks, industry benchmarks. So we consulted professional industry organizations. We called on subject matter experts throughout the firm, whether they be retired police chiefs or fire chiefs, to make sure that we were addressing public safety with the due diligence that it was due. Research institutions and really the whole gambit to make sure that what we were putting on paper for Fitchburg was valuable. We understand sort of the unique position that Fitchburg is in as a village transitioned into a city that continues to grow. And we wanted to make sure that we could take into account as many of those unique needs as possible. So recommendations wise, the outcome of this review resulted in recommendations across a variety of departments. That does not mean, I want to call this out very explicitly, that doesn't mean that there aren't needs in other areas, right? That doesn't mean that there aren't going to be emergent priorities that the city needs to address 2 to 4 years, 5 years from now that Baker Tilly didn't see coming, right? These are simply the things that we can see coming based on the benchmarking, based on the research that we've done within the scope of the engagement. Again, that's also not to say that additional needs couldn't be found if additional work was done, right? This wasn't sort of an all-encompassing study of every single facet of the city. For example, we did not do a crime analysis, right? A disparity study for access to city resources wasn't done. The city's working on a strategic plan, so this wasn't analyzed in alignment with a strategic plan, right? So there are sort of some inherent gaps in what was done as well. But I think those were all understood by both the city and Baker Tilly headed into the engagement. As we mentioned, every single department was interviewed, but ultimately a recommendation might not have been made. That doesn't mean that we didn't discuss an initial observation with the city as something that came out of field work. That doesn't mean that we might have identified something that down the road could be something the city wants to look at, but ultimately didn't rise to the level of a reporting item.
Rory?
Yeah.
So I guess equity to city services
Yeah.
is something of an issue.
Mm-hmm.
So it was contemplated at the beginning and purposely left out of the scope of this? Is that true?
I wouldn't say it was contemplated at the beginning so much as it was something that came out of initial observations, that staff were self-aware of the fact that there might be barriers to service delivery based on the location of certain city campuses or buildings. That was something that, we made the city aware of and has been in our reporting throughout, and I think it's definitely something that warrants follow-up. But a disparity study per se, where we're actually going through and analyzing the DEI barriers to access, wasn't part of scope, so wasn't something that we did beyond surfacing that it was brought to our attention.
The biggest priority was identifying that 3 to 5 year staffing plan for all the different departments so that we could go into each budget cycle knowing, okay, yep, planning's up for a new position or finance is needing for a new position. So that was the ultimate goal of the RFP. And then any kind of other operational efficiencies or structure efficiencies. So one that was identified was the parks director potentially moving then under the parks manager moving to a public works and just kind of restructuring things so that they made a little more sense. So it wasn't we didn't ask for Baker Tilly to do any type of disparity analysis.
Okay, good. It's just, I hadn't thought of it until you mentioned it. It's interesting to think of how that might play into the staffing needs,
Certainly, and especially as you think about what does a future strategic plan look like, I think that will further guide sort of where you invest resources and what you might prioritize. Not just as it relates to access, but it relates to public safety, as it relates to affordable housing, as it relates to a variety of the emergent priorities.
Public safety is left off of the recommendation slide. Is that because it's mentioned elsewhere?
It is, yeah. It's mentioned as the emergent priorities because we wanted to capture both what the recommendation was as well as that those areas need additional consideration beyond just benchmarking. So we will get to those, certainly. So overall, as you can see, what Baker Tilly found from a benchmarking perspective for a city of Fitchburg's size, complexity, geography, operations, service delivery needs, a minimum total FTE change of plus 11 is what was arrived at from the benchmarking. Now we say a minimum because some of this is open to growth, especially as the fire department continues to move towards a full-time model, especially if that's undertaken as we recommend, then that number, as we indicate on there with the asterisks, will need to grow as well to accommodate that transition. But at a minimum, we're saying 11 FTE over the next 3 to 5 years. So as we talk about the summary of recommendations, I think this first set of 3 or 4 are really kind of aligned with helping city business and really city operations professionalize and move forward. with accommodating some particular administrative changes. So the deputy city administrator change was one that the city came to us, I think, right at kickoff, as something that the city was contemplating and wanted to make sure that we sort of fast-track that part of analysis. We were able to do that, issue a memo to the personnel committee so that you could move forward with that recommendation. I think that's definitely a key step, not only in limiting Chad's span of control and reducing the risk of that large span of control, but also helping professionalize some of the roles underneath it that we're recommending and move those departments forward as well, so that this person can specialize in those areas and help support those new positions.
And Bill, that was prior to you joining the personnel committee when we brought a memo from Baker Tilly about the deputy city administrator.
Okay.
And just to clarify for the public, that is the position that we just recently hired.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Correct.
He's starting.
September 25th, Adam Sayre.
Okay.
Yep.
Great, so role filled, and we can always add that as a management comment too to the report, that the role's been filled, that they're starting. So the second one, which you'll also notice represented on here, you see this box down here for communications director, is our recommendation to create a communications director role and fill that role, consolidating the communications functions of the city into one area, inclusive of Fact TV, to make sure that there's a cohesive communications management strategy and operations moving forward, especially for a city this large with the communication demands of a community like this, and the fact that you have Fact TV at your disposal, which not every community does. We think this makes sense and in the best interest of the city.
Can I ask, in terms of benchmarking to other communities, is it common to have a communications department head?
From what we found, yeah, in the communities that we benchmarked, yeah, and as well as just our general, I guess, public sector knowledge, both in Wisconsin and outside of Wisconsin. For a community of your size, this is a common role to have, yep.
Great, thank you.
So the second one, similar to sort of building out and continuing, I guess, with the theme of building out administrations is adding HR capacity. I think this is especially important as we head into sort of unknown HR territory, right? All the rumors of a silver tsunami, if and when that ever occurs, shallowing talent pools, emphasis on police recruitment and retention, emphasis on fire recruitment as you move to a full-time department. So we really feel like these roles, especially over the next 3 to 5 years, I mean, I don't want to use the cliche, will pay for themselves, right? But in a lot of ways, these roles over the next 3 to 5 years are going to be important in achieving all the other stuff that the city wants to achieve.
And I will say, having served on the personnel committee for 3 years, it's very evident how short-staffed we are in HR, despite the fact that Sarah's incredible and has done an amazing job. But the amount of turnover and the amount of vacancies we've had over the years, it just seems very clear that this is necessary. So thanks for, and so the talent acquisition manager would be focused exclusively on hiring. Is that correct?
Yep. So, and I think even things like updating job descriptions, posting, right? Really, so the whole gambit of talent acquisition, managing special programs like a recruitment bonus, things like that. Yep.
Okay.
Similar to human resources, finance also needs some additional capacity, especially as the city continues to grow, the complexity of finance continues to grow. One of our recommendations as well is to take a look at, the technology systems that underpin a lot of the city's operations. One of those is your enterprise resource planning ERP system or finance system. As you consider what that needs to look like in the future and the complexity of that system grows and the demands of that system grow, these positions will also be ones that quote unquote pay for themselves as you're able to do more in the finance space, as you're able to do more advanced budgeting, budget forecasting, variance analysis, things like that will really help move city finance forward. So as I just touched on, and as Sarah mentioned, this wasn't just all sort of org charts and FTE. We did want to make sure that we highlighted important operational efficiencies that we identified. One of those areas was definitely information technology, not just, hardware and software necessarily, but also the larger systems that underpin those, like your ERP, like your HR system. So really taking a deep dive and, I guess in consultant speak, it's called a needs assessment, but really going through some kind of assessment as a city to understand what truly are our user needs for these different systems. Are the current systems meeting those needs? And if not, what is there available for us to buy or procure to meet those needs? Ultimately, I'm not gonna lie to you, right? As a consultant that does implementations, what you find out there might not be better than what you have for your needs today. So some of this is also anticipating what you need 3, 5, 6, 10 years from now, because most system implementations are 2 to 4 year undertakings, right? They're really big undertakings before you hit that go live point. So this is really something to start thinking about now and start thinking about how are we gonna align our systems with our new employees, our new headcount, as well as what are some of the things we wanna be looking for in some of these new roles, if and when we do bring in new systems.
So, do you feel like we're being held back by our current systems? Or, that's the impression I got, but then you also said maybe there's nothing else that's gonna meet our needs better at the moment.
Yeah, so I don't know that you're being held back. I'll use one example. I don't want to throw Missy under the bus, right? So finance, for example. This project was extended by about a month. One of my concerns as your consultant was I didn't want to walk you into a risk violation, essentially an internal control violation. One of those for me, in my experience, would be paying off an expired PO. Well, when I brought that up to Misty, she said not to worry because the system isn't advanced enough to track that you have those expired POs and that you're paying off of them. And so that's a situation, right, where you're not being held back, but you're also not in a best practice environment either. So I think that's really what I mean by figuring out what's best for you, because best practice is a whole bunch of stuff, right? And you don't need to do every best practice thing under the sun. So it could be for right now, for where the city's at growth-wise, for how council feels, basically what your risk appetite is, you're okay with the system as is. Or you could say, right, no, we want stronger internal controls around our financial system, and so we're gonna make that investment in a more robust system, even if it's not what we need today, it's what we believe we need 5 years from now, and so we're gonna make that investment now. So that's what I mean by sort of, it might not be better, like you might go out and the only systems that will give you internal controls around purchase order management might be 2 times as big as Fitchburg needs right now. Maybe it's only the 3 biggest fish in the pond. But, right, if you continue the growth that you've experienced over the course of time, that will be a system that you'll grow into over the course of time as well. So I think that's really sort of the cost benefit decision, as well as it underpinned with people, right? Because that's the other side of cost benefit too. System implementations are a lot of work on staff. And so that's part of the consideration, is it might be worthwhile to staff up finance before you put a new implementation on their plate.
In regards to the finance software, my understanding is that we have a new finance software in the ARPA TID investment plan. I don't know if Chad can speak to that. I have to look
That is true.
at. Okay, because I know we've talked. I mean, it's quite expensive, but I know we've talked about updating that software. So I just wanted to put that on the radar for anyone that's watching. That's been discussed.
Okay.
So.
But yeah, that's just what we meant by that area of it. The sort of worthwhileness for right now might not be worthwhile, but it's not, doesn't mean that you should just forget about it, because then you get 5 years from now with a fully staffed finance team frustrated because their system doesn't meet their needs of today. So
Okay.
just don't let it fall off the radar type of thing. So I guess transitioning the conversation a little bit away from administration and into public works, and this is something that Sarah touched on sort of at the beginning, was there was already kind of some, I guess we can call them prevailing winds behind the scenes as it related to public works and parks and what the new structure might need or look like into the future. So really when we approached the study, we approached it with that lens of, hey, the city's thinking they might want to do X. let's see if we can validate that. And so over the course of doing benchmarking, going back and forth with Sarah and the project team to really understand what they were envisioning this to look like in their minds, we were able to substantiate that in our benchmarking in our study, that was ultimately the best way to move forward with a potential reorganization as it related to parks and recreation and figuring out how to separate out those duties. So what we recommended ultimately was to bring parks under Public Works and put urban forestry sort of in that same reporting chain, just as a result of being able to more effectively share labor, especially your urban forestry labor, manage labor, similar duties, similar qualifications, better sort of advancement as well, better opportunities for advancement up through an organizational chart. We just felt like this was the best alignment. So then I guess the flip side of that is what you'll see is recommending to create that leisure and community services director position that will sit above both recreation and the senior center, pulling out that recreation function from parks and recreation.
And like if we're looking at getting a teen center, would that fall under here as well, in addition to like if we have permanent staff at the hub?
Exactly.
Yep.
That is a thought, that this department, reorganized or restructured department would be that area in which we would potentially increase services.
Okay. I wasn't, yeah. Well, it's called.
I have a question.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, you go.
No, it is called Leisure and Community Services, so I guess, yeah, I was thinking leisure, recreation, that's a little bit different than senior center and teen center, where it's more of a, an education or, right.
Yeah, and I think, Sarah and I went back and forth on this too. I think we even at one point where we were just gonna say department to be named later, but we wanted to put a tangible name to it. I don't think you're by any means, as with anything in our report, it's just a recommendation. You're certainly not married to that name, so feel free to change it. That's just a smash up of names that we felt like kind of fit what was trying to be aimed by that department. So.
I'm sure Sarah will think of something really cool acronym.
Oh, boy.
One question in regards to this. So if you did exactly this, you're talking about reclassifying the senior center director potentially to this leisure and community services director. Does that mean that this would be a net neutral? So like we wouldn't hire somebody to replace that? She would just also continue to oversee the staff she oversees, but also start overseeing the recreation staff?
So we see that you're still going to have a senior center manager, and then you're going to have a recreation manager. So it wouldn't be necessarily reclassing her and not replacing her. So we would still have somebody just overseeing senior center, someone overseeing recreation, but then posting this opportunity for anyone who wants to apply to become the next director of community services. So we're not looking at.
So it would be a plus one.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a net.
No one.
So at the department head level, would the senior center director still be a department head, or would the?
It's all yet to be determined.
And so another sort of operational, not necessarily headcount org chart related one, but is restructuring the Healthy Initiative Program oversight from planning and zoning to the senior center staff or to that new department staff, however that may best sort of funnel up to what that department looks like to better align with areas of service and expertise. Okay, so now we want to talk a little bit about some emergent priorities that are both Baker-Tilly recommendations combined with stuff that we found above and beyond the benchmarking that we believe the city should consider. in addition to obviously things like a strategic plan, things like that to really quantify some of these decisions before moving forward with anything that we recommend, just because of their importance to the community. Those areas are police, fire, and we call it economic development, but it's essentially affordable housing because that's where it sits. So organization-wide, I mean, we've continued to reinforce this to the internal project team, is really make sure that a citywide strategic plan is developed. I think, we're very confident in our work in terms of we believe our recommendations are what you should move forward with. But what I will always say to all of my clients is the recommendations need to be aligned to your strategic plan. Because ultimately Baker Tilly could recommend that you do 5 things that aren't aligned to a strategic priority. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do them, but it certainly doesn't mean that they should be prioritized by your leadership, right? And so I think that's one of the key next steps, especially as we move into the discussion of the other emergent priorities, is to really consider something like the importance of public safety to the community that should be rooted in a community strategic plan. And the second one is, the create more access for residents to city services. And so especially as we think about the campus that we're sitting at right now, it's tricky for most residents to get here without a car. Bus service isn't regular to the library to access those resources, to the senior center to access those resources. And so finding ways, whether it's partnering with, public transportation, whether it's improving pedestrian walkways, whether it's, a bike sharing program, right? I think there are all kinds of ideas out there to increase access to city services, but that's definitely something that really came across in a lot of our conversations, even people that weren't necessarily responsible for delivering those services, right? Community members who are also employees that recognize that. So
I have one question or one,
Yeah.
I guess. We last year we put in funding in the budget for at the end of the year for an intercity transit feasibility study, which in part was focused on improving transit options within the city to address that problem. I'm really happy to hear that. I mean, obviously, I'm not happy to hear about the problem, but I'm happy to hear that came out because I see that very, very, very vividly in my experience. But I do think that study would go partway to fixing it. The problem is that public works staff we've been short-staffed for a very long time. Chad, do you have any update about that, or Bill on TTC? Have you guys talked about that at all?
It hasn't come up yet in TTC, but I'm sure it will.
Public Works Engineering still,
Well, the funding. Okay.
they still have not had the capacity to prioritize this. We are gonna engage Metro in at least some initial conversations later this month on what some options might be from the Metro front.
Great. I figured that was the case. I just wanted to check in. Thanks.
Okay. So the second emergent priority we want to discuss was police. So first and foremost, the primary recommendation obviously is to improve police recruitment and retention. And I know there's an item on the agenda after this to hopefully address some of the retention. Second is review police command structure, reclass lieutenants to captains and add 2 lieutenants to help improve some of the administrative gap that the police department was feeling. I think above and beyond this, though, a lot of what came out in conversations with police staff, with community members, with council members, was that Fitchburg isn't necessarily like other communities. And I think that's the tricky thing with benchmarking, right? Is we do the best we can to select communities that you're most similar to, benchmark you against those, but at the end of the day, that's just a single data point, right? It says you have X thousand residents, this city has X thousand residents, this city has X police staff, you have Y police staff, let's compare and contrast. I think that's a good starting point for discussion, but for public safety, we always recommend taking it further than that. And so we really do recommend that the city of Fitchburg invest in what we would call a crime analysis that really digs into the types of crimes, numbers of crimes, calls out types of calls, lengths on calls, distance traveled on calls, and really investigates cost of service for the city. Because what really came out to us, and I only bring this up because I'm working with another community, similar size, on the village-city threshold, honestly. And they're about to acquire some high-density housing, annex some high-density housing area outside of their city. They're doing all of this before they even do the annexation. Unfortunately, Fitchburg's in the position where they went through the annexation and now they're trying to solve for it on the back end. And so that's why we really do recommend further investment in this area to really understand where the needs are beyond just recruitment, retention, and leadership staff. We identified those things, and I think everybody in this room knows those things to be true, but there's also probably more to the story. And similar to access to city services, those things that getting to that deeper analysis just wasn't part of this scope, unfortunately, but certainly something that we believe is worthwhile.
Can you speak to how this organization happens? Just because intuitively I don't quite understand the operations captain versus the kind of the police officer captain. Can you talk about that?
So Chief Morales is here. Chief, do you want to speak to the org chart that's up there and kind of your vision?
Yeah, I'm trying to pick one up. That's not the org chart that we produced. What you have is there's 3 parts in law enforcement. There's a patrol section in law enforcement. There's a support section or investigative side in law enforcement, and there's an administrative side. So if as departments grow, if you want to go as big as a department of 1 million, the structure will still remain in 3 different areas of responsibility: patrol, support, investigation, and the third being administration. So as a department grows, you're going to have commanders that have the bigger picture, that are going to be more at the executive level, handling that operation. Underneath them, in the patrol level, you have a high-ranking officer that's working that shift to manage the administrative functions during that shift. Those are called shift lieutenants. So in the ask or in our plan, we would be looking to implement shift lieutenants through a period of time to fill the important pieces for risk management, administrative pieces during the night shift. So the current lieutenants that we have now are doing captain's functions. They're overseeing command of a bigger function within the organization. A lieutenant would oversee a shift or a group of people for that period of time. Second shift lieutenant would be the commander of that shift and all operations under that shift. If we were to get these lieutenant positions and implement them implement them in our plan, we would start with the first one handling the night shift, preferably like a 7 p.m. to 3 a.m. shift. And the second phase with the second lieutenant now having one to work more of the second shift, the other one work more of the third shift. And eventually getting to a third lieutenant that will handle the first shift. That will alleviate, what that does is now your sergeants, your first line supervisors, it puts them out on the street to supervise the police officers. So this is more of a risk management piece, and it's a very basic function in law enforcement amongst the command structure. If you were to pick up the org chart, an org chart that shows that most police departments are going to have, as they grow to a city of 40,000 in population and up, they're going to have a first, second, and third patrol shift lieutenants. And then you go off of that. So that's what the shift lieutenant does. They manage the entire department throughout that shift. Commanders will be looking at a bigger operation. How is our patrol function as a whole doing, and how do we keep that patrol function going, and using the lieutenants to implement that plan via the sergeants out on the street with the officers. Same thing with the investigative section, if you'd like me to talk more about the support or investigative side. Depending on
No, that's helpful. I would love to dig into this more, but I was just curious about the difference. So that's great. Thank you so much, Chief Morales.
Okay.
And it does look like when we say captain and we say lieutenant, there are really specialties within those titles, right? So one is more patrol and the other is investigative.
From the way that we would have submitted the organizational structure, you would have like you said, you would have the support services side captain, they're more the investigative side. And then the operations captain is more from the patrol standpoint. Those lieutenants aren't necessarily specialized. They would be shifted over to that patrol side. It reduces the span of control because right now our patrol lieutenant is supervising 9 sergeants. So we shift those lieutenants over to the patrol side, so it would be less span of control for each of those lieutenants, reducing risk, increasing accountability, and those types of things as well.
And similar to what the chief said, every community that we benchmarked had a captain-lieutenant system, multiple captains with between 2 and 4 lieutenants as a result. So this is not out of the realm of normality, especially as chief said, for departments of this size, serving communities of this size. So the second one is fire. So we've recommended additional fire FTE. And as we talked about at the beginning, some of this is contingent both if, when, and how the transition to a more full-time department ends up looking. Obviously, if it happens much more quickly, then these positions will need to be added much more quickly. If it's more of a slow transition, then I don't think you're gonna need them to add them all at once. Similar to also what we mentioned, these are our estimates based on what we know today. Fitchburg could drastically be different in 2 years. You could have a whole bunch more high-density housing that stresses fire in different ways in different places. You could not. And so I think that's another thing to consider is as you transition to a more professional department, making sure that you're matching that trajectory and that pace with the pace and growth of the city. As fire's intimately aware, as the city's grown, they've been, along with police, one of the departments put sort of in the riskiest position, and I think making sure that they don't continue to sort of sit behind the 8 ball on the growth is gonna be important as the city continues public safety. And so we recommend that not only is our recommendation taken with due diligence, but it's taken a step further and an actual plan for that transition into a more full-time department is put into place. So that the city and the fire department in particular is relying less on volunteer labor, which is both putting their full-time staff and their volunteer staff at risk right now.
Gabrielle is muted.
Is Chief Pulvermacher there?
I am.
Yeah, I'm just curious because do you have? I haven't really seen I haven't seen a staffing plan for the fire department in terms of moving towards career. Is that something that you have in the works that you could share in the near future?
Yeah, it's actually a part
Not
of,
a
it was included as an attachment to this report.
At the very end,
Oh, great.
police and fire.
Oh, great.
I can share that in greater detail with you, but yes, we know that the system
Oh, I see.
that we have right now is not serving the city as it once did. So we need to seriously consider what our ratio of full-time staff versus paid on call, paid on premises is. And so the staffing plan that we introduced takes that into account. Knowing full well that the recruitment of part-time staff is becoming increasingly more difficult and the existing workforce model needs to be challenged.
I think it would be interesting, Sarah, if we could maybe consider having a committee meeting where we dig into the police staffing plan and the fire staffing plan, either the same meeting or separate meetings, just given the fact that these are such unique departments that are such a big part of the city. It'd be interesting to dig into those more deeply as a separate item.
Yeah, we could hold a personnel committee meeting to go through those staffing plans.
You just want to add that to the September agenda?
Yeah. We'll make it on the September agenda, personnel agenda. We already have a meeting set up.
It might be, the reason I mentioned that, it might be helpful to have that conversation prior to the budget.
Okay. And then the last one is economic development, and in particular, assessing the housing demand for the city and the affordable housing needs for the city, and a potential housing specialist to accompany those needs. We put here that person could sit in economic development because that's where housing sits now. It is worth mentioning that in the communities that we benchmark, housing traditionally sits in like a planning and zoning department, especially because as you think about affordable housing, it really is planning and zoning. That's how you get to affordable housing. But we understand that might not be the area of expertise of an individual department head, and it might make more sense to leave it in economic development. Nevertheless, however the city arrives at where that person may or may not sit, it's definitely something worthwhile for the city to continue to look into as it grows and continues to develop. So conclusions-wise, really one of the key takeaways for us was the rapid growth the city's experienced has stretched resources and staff. In particular in public safety, as you've heard, but also elsewhere. And as the departments and service delivery has gotten stretched, so too have the individuals supporting them. Right? At the end of the day, a department like HR or finance has internal customers and external customers. And unfortunately, they're kind of being run ragged by both of them because the internal customers are also being run ragged themselves. And so making sure that staffing is catching up with city growth is going to sort of have a domino effect, right? It's not just going to solve one pain point, it's going to have a cascading effect on multiple pain points that city staff are experiencing concurrently. Making sure, and I know some of this is already undergoing, but a review of recruitment and retention strategies, especially as it relates to police and fire, is going to be really important heading forward. Changing leadership roles that we've recommended, in addition to implementing a strategic plan, we believe is going to really help the city. I mean, I don't use this in a pejorative way, but the city professionalize, right? That's kind of the term that we use is really help city administration move forward and take that step towards professionalization of operations. And then potentially additional studies, right? We've mentioned a crime analysis, we've mentioned additional work to be done on the staffing plans presented by department heads, but also a needs assessment. As the world changes, a classification and compensation study could also be worthwhile. Something like a disparity study that's going to look at your barriers to entry at city resources could be worthwhile. Even honestly, a full-on cost of service study, especially for some of your high-value services like public safety, really understanding what those services cost to deliver and aligning your budget accordingly. I think those are going to be some important next steps for the city to continue after this. Questions not already asked?
I have a question. Could you go back to that list of studies?
Yeah.
Chad, is there anywhere that we put together a plan for potential future studies? Because I mean, obviously that doesn't necessarily fit in the CIP, but there does seem to be maybe an importance of talking about the prioritization of studies, because obviously they're expensive to hire a consultant, but they can be very important in terms of doing that. Do we keep a record of that in any way, any centralized way?
So typically studies are funded in the operational budget, so they come up on a year-to-year basis depending on what any department and or city council would like studied. We have set aside money in the ARPA TID investment plan for the strategic plan, so we can hire outside consultants to help facilitate the development of a citywide strategic plan. I think that would be the most important step to undertake as far as any additional studies at this point in time, in order to help shape future studies and how they might align with the strategic plan.
Great, thanks.
And a couple of years ago, there was little appetite for additional studies. I know when we had talked about the fire EMS study, there was a lack of buy-in.
Right, yeah, there was.
From a council perspective.
Well, it sounds to me like the strategic plan is kind of an analogy to our comprehensive plan for the growth of the city itself. This is for, guiding principles for how we actually run that city we're growing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It should set up your strategic priorities, and all your activities should align to those, and then everybody's individual goals should align to those activities.
And I know this is maybe outside of the scope of what you were looking at, but I know one of the things that continues to impact the fire service is emergency medical. And right now, we have a shared service that's shared between 3 municipalities. We ultimately have 3 different organizations serving 2 city municipalities. So has that been something that was at least considered as far as future?
Yeah, so that's something that we brought up to Sarah and Chad, the internal team, that a Fitch-Rona shared services assessment is probably worthwhile. It's something I've actually done in communities where there's a shared EMS service across the entire county, serving different communities. And I think really the key thing with that one is not just understanding cost of service versus quality of service, but there's a second piece to it, right, which is cost benefit analysis. And really, what is the cost benefit to the city and quite frankly to fire to a decision one way or the other?
And you mentioned the strategic plan would be a good source of where that information could come out of, as whether we merge or not.
Yep.
Gabrielle, any other questions?
I'm curious in terms of, so we obviously wanted to get this done before the budget conversation started. So obviously a lot of those conversations happen behind the scenes without any public knowledge or with council insight into it. So is potentially restructuring some of these departments part of the conversation at this point, or is that something that you would think would happen further down the line? I'm just curious if we can expect to see potentially a consideration of some shifts in departments as soon as this fall with the 2024 budget.
So that could be possible. I think it'll depend on what the appetite is for the council in particular after they've had a chance to review this report and digest it and reflect on it and take a little bit of time here, as well as for the mayor in addition as she begins to prepare her budget. I think once we have an idea if there is an indication from the mayor and council to move forward with any of the restructuring, then I think it'll be up to staff to identify the when is an appropriate time to do that and how does it best get accomplished, and then work to implement that strategy. So there's a number of moving parts related to those potential restructure efforts. But it is possible if there is support for them that they could be identified and move forward in the 2024 budget. One thing you will see in addition to the Baker-Tilly recommendations is we did ask departments to submit anticipated staffing proposals for the next 5 years. So we will also create that list and be sure to distribute that to elected officials as another tool in determining which positions could be added over the next several years.
That is a really good tool, I think, for the budget process. I'm just curious if you feel like there's a need for a council discussion about this, so leading into the budget process, or is it more going to be a situation where the mayor might propose some of these changes and the council would accept it as part of the budget process? I'm not saying that we should do one way or another. I'm just curious if there is a need for a full council discussion about these somewhat significant changes before we get too deep into the budget process.
Yeah, I'll defer that to the mayor. That's a conversation that she and I will have as far as what her desired path forward is. It could be the one that you mentioned in which if she desires to submit in her proposed budget to move forward with one or more of the recommended structural changes, that would certainly trigger an opportunity for the council to discuss that through the budget deliberation process and determine if there is support to begin to implement those identified structural changes. Of course, alternatively, as you mentioned, there could be a specific conversation that's had in advance of the budget process or outside the budget process at a committee of the whole or at perhaps an agenda item at a council meeting. So I think those are the two most likely paths.
Yeah, I just do remember when we did the compensation study last year, and then that was incorporated into the initial mayor's budget proposal. you know, because that's a systemic change. You know, it has to be throughout the budget. It can't be something that's piecemeal done. So I thought that was done very well. You know, we had a study, we explained the rationale behind that across the board pay raise, and then those individual raises that were above that 3%. I thought that was done very well. So I think, you know, making these changes just in the background, I think could be a very good process as well. But it would be interesting to know. I mean, I hope the council members will watch this and reach out to the mayor with their thoughts. But from my perspective, I thought this report was spot on in terms of identifying issues that I've seen, and then also bringing up things that I did not know myself. But I really appreciate the thoroughness. If anyone in the public is interested in reading it, there's a lot more detail in the report that digs into these issues, and I think there's a lot of justification for making some pretty significant changes. Obviously, that's a complicated thing to do, and we can't hire all the positions right away. But I think it's a great report, and I really appreciate Baker Tilly's insight. And I'm very, very happy that we did this. I didn't quite know what the final product would look like, but this seems very actionable and very helpful for us going into the next, 3 to 5 years. So thank you.
One of the concerns that I had as fire chief was how the recommendation came out. And once explained, it makes sense because it suggests that more work is needed.
Yep.
But if somebody's reading the recommendation as a summary, it looks like we only need one person over the next 3 to 5 years, and that's not the case.
Right, yeah.
There's more information provided in the public safety departments though, where you say, do refer to your staffing, the staffing plan for the police and fire department. So you were clear in your
But
report.
we can clear up that summary too.
Yeah,
We can just make a note that it'll be more than one as department needs continue to grow with the
It
move
was
to
a pair of
full-time.
asterisks
Yep.
in there or something.
Yeah, there was a little one, but yeah,
But I agree. I looked at the top line there. It said 11.
it's a little misleading, yeah.
Well, and I'm trying to look at this from an elected official's point of view, where they're given how many different reports, they're on how many different committees, they have to prepare for a meeting, and they're gonna look at a summary
the
in
one.
many situations.
Yep.
And the summary in this situation makes it look like we only need one person.
I agree.
We can make that clarification. That's
I think I think that's why we should dig into this at the next meeting, fire and police, because it's too much. There's so much nuance there, and there's such a big picture there that I do think it necessitates a separate conversation. But yeah, I mean, I've been made aware over the last year about the insane amounts of overtime that's happening in the fire department, that it's completely burning out our firefighters, and a real immediate need for adding staff. And I hope that we might even see something like that before the end of the year, and hopefully certainly in the 2024 budget. That's just one of the things that's on my mind, just because I've heard that frequently from the firefighters. So I agree that I think the report hides that a little bit. So I think it'd be good to have an extra conversation about it.
So, Bill, do you have any other comments or questions at all? Nope. I'll wrap it up. I want to echo a lot of the comments that have been said here. Gabriella's comments, I think, are very accurate in the assessment of the report. I think you guys did a great job coming in, doing the outreach and spending time with staff, and coming up with a report that does have actionable steps that we can take, that does set us up for the future. And it would be a challenge for any organization to come in as an external consultant to hit every single point, so to speak. But I think by and large, you guys did a really good job, and we're grateful for that. I want to thank all of the staff that participated in the interviews and conversations. I think the insights that they provided was quite helpful. I mean, after all, our teams here throughout the city, the 250 plus full and part-time people, are the folks who live, eat, and breathe, and sleep Fitchburg. So they clearly know what's happening in the community in their various departments. And then, of course, the internal work group that Sarah had mentioned helped guide the efforts and coordination amongst Baker Tilly and our staff. Sarah, Mike Zimmerman, Jill McCone, Misty Dodge. They were all great partners on this as well. So we thank everybody for their work on this and look forward to continued conversation and hopefully some implementation over the next few years here.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. We'll plan to issue sort of a final version by Friday, incorporating these last tweaks and edits, and then issue a final version on Friday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, one final question. Is this going to be available on the city website for outside of just the personnel committee agenda? Is it
Yeah, we can add it,
going
absolutely.
to be posted?
Yep.
Great. Well, if there are no additional comments, we can move on to agenda item 4B, police retention bonus policy and procedure. And I guess I'll kick it off to Chief Morales.
Studies.
I think we're gonna start with Sarah first. She has,
Oh,
Yeah,
Sarah,
I wanted to share some recruitment stats because it was kind of alarming. So about 5 years ago, we would receive 100 to 150 applications for a month-old posting for police officer. We've had a continuous recruitment going on for a little over a year now, and we've received 185 applications. So how many applications we've received in a little over a year is almost the equivalent of what we would have got in just 1 month period, 3 to 4 or 5 years ago. So our numbers are dwindling. People are not applying, and those that are applying aren't passing the background, the psychologicals. This is not unique to Fitchburg. This is a nationwide trend. Police departments all over are looking for ways to be creative and retain their staff and attract new officers. At the Dane County Sheriff's Office, which is our neighbor, they are hiring officers with prior law enforcement experience for over $100,000 and meeting their vacation and their sick time banks. We've lost 5 officers and 1 sergeant to Dane County already. We're currently down 7 sworn staff. Our turnover rate for police sworn staff was 25% last year. To kind of put it in perspective, usually it's about 9%. So we lost 14 sworn staff last year. Typically it'll be about 5 staff every year. And then in addition, we've got 5 staff that are ready for retirement. So we're kind of in a crisis mode at this point. We have a lot of salary savings. So we actually have about $274,000 in salary savings that we can use toward this retention program to essentially show our commitment and appreciation to the staff that remain. So this policy has been vetted by legal, and we're really hopeful that the Personnel Committee will look to make a recommendation for approval of this, and then we have to take it to the Finance Committee and the Council on August 22nd for final approval. So anyway, I just wanted to give that little opener just to show you kind of the stats there. I'd like to turn it over to Chief Morales to kind of get into the meat of the program. I'm going to share my screen because there were some numbers that were just updated because we did have a retirement of a detective. So this is the most recent version. It's similar to the one you had in your packet, but the numbers are just adjusted a little bit.
are you,
Yep.
call me?
Yep.
Okay. I just want to reiterate that this is a national crisis amongst law enforcement. I should reiterate, there's several police agencies throughout the country that are experiencing this crisis. What adds on to the crisis in Fitchburg, and just hearing the Baker Tilly presentation, is that the city's growing. So we're not only down bodies, but the city's growing, where even if we were at full staff, we're looking to implement additional positions. So that's the crisis that we're in. We have our experience levels that have dropped. And that's one of the crises that you go through, or we're experiencing in law enforcement with, the mass retirements or people leaving law enforcement just because of the bad picture that law enforcement has been painted, that brush that law enforcement has been painted with since 2020. It's creating deficiencies everywhere. I can just tell you in Dane County, the 5 cities that we collaborate with, 3 other cities are experiencing issues with vacancies, recruiting, and retention. And just to reiterate what Sarah said, we're all fighting for the same applicants that apply. If you went through, one process in the past that would you would have 150 applicants. In 1 year, we've had 180 applicants. And those applicants, the common question that we ask when we're interviewing, if we find excuse me for looking at the camera, but you're here too, Bill. But one of the questions we ask is, are you in any other processes? And they pick up their figures and they start saying, I'm in 1, 2, 3, 4 processes. So even if we offer them a position, they still have to go through the background. They still have to go through the medical. They still have to go through the physical and psychological. And we end up losing them to another city depending on who gets to the finish line sooner. So just to give you an example, I speak much just to keep things in Dane County. One city, they were 8 vacancies short last year. They've been having an ongoing recruiting process. They're currently down, depending on, I think they went down 5 this week, but they were down 4. So they've only been able to increase their staffing to 4. As I indicated at the beginning of the year when I was speaking staffing crisis, I said this is at least a 2-year process to get us back. And on top of that, we're looking to increase the department size to meet the needs of the organization. We have dropped down on the 3rd shift to 3 officers per shift after 3 o'clock. And the reason why we're doing that is our officers are filling vacancies. They're orderings, and many of these are mandatory just to fill a minimum staffing levels of 4 per shift. Now, as indicated, I think Alder Jetzer was the only one that may have not seen our presentation, but we have 34 square miles. And if we look at our shifts minimum staffing, on any given day, you can have 4 patrol officers covering 34 square miles. Now, we don't just go out and patrol and wait for a call. There's traffic that we have to do, and obviously as alders, you understand the traffic needs that we have. There's calls for service, and some of those calls for service, as you get in the more denser areas of the city and multi-unit apartment buildings, they require a 2-person assignment. So you now have 2 officers that have to respond, leaving you now to 2 officers to maintain another call for the rest of the city. It's a very difficult piece to manage, hence why we're asking also for administrative pieces to hopefully increase our staffing levels by having sergeants out there that can supervise officers and can manage those calls for service to determine what needs 2 officers per call, what needs 1 officer per call, or even to to pull the alarm and say we need mutual aid. So the level of vacancies that we have here are rather broad. In addition to that, seeing that we've had so many officers leave, just in general with Fitchburg and other agencies, the discussion is talked about amongst chiefs. What do we do? How are we going to reduce the staff, and what can we do for recruiting and retention? And there's been a number of different ideas. There was one agency, Menominee Falls, is offering $10,000 for lateral transfers. They had the process open for a month, the application process, for several weeks, 0 applications. They closed the process and only had 2 apply. And nothing's to say that those 2 are going to get it. With the $10,000 signing bonus, one of our officers left to Wauwatosa. Wauwatosa has a $7,500 signing bonus for lateral transfers, and that department, I'm not for sure, but I think increased that. I want to look at things different. There's several other chiefs that want to look at things differently. We have officers here that are sticking around. They're showing dedication and commitment to the city of Fitchburg and the organization. They have not left. On top of that, they're filling 11 vacancies. That means they're working the overtime. They're being told to stay when they want to go home. They're being told to come in when they want to be at home. They're being taken out of their comfort levels to fill the needs of the organization and to serve the city of Fitchburg. One of the ways that what was addressed, and has been a talk for the last year and a half, is why not reward those that are here versus reward somebody that we don't know what their productivity level is, and reward them with our salary savings. There's nice chunk of money that that the police department has saved due to the vacancies, but somebody's still doing the work. So the thing is, let's try this. The one thing that I can't answer is this the one all end all? Research any department that has tried multiple different ways to recruit and retain what you have. There is no solid answer. Although here's a good opportunity to reward those that are sticking around and doing the job here for the city. Did I miss anything, Matt?
Nailed it.
So the policy up there kind of walks you through kind of where we're thinking the salary savings will go to. So it kind of starts with recognition of pay for sworn staff. So you can see we're looking at $2,700 per full-time sworn staff. This is for anyone that has been on the department's payroll as of January 1 through December 10th. So they have to stay on through December 10th. No hires or rehires are eligible if they were hired this year. Of course, if anyone was on an FMLA event, they're still eligible for it. And we had, like I said, we vetted this through our legal too to make sure that, you know, tax-wise, we're doing everything that we're supposed to be doing. There's a second component of this policy program, and it's recognition pay for the professional staff. This is your civilian staff, dispatcher, record specialist. You can see the listed titles there. And that would be, it looks like $1,350 per non-sworn full-time professional staff, and then even for part-time staff. So civilian or non-sworn professional staff would receive $675. So same rules about being on the payroll, you know, sometime between January 1 and December 10. And then the next component is a service bonus. So this would be a service bonus of $170 per year of service for sworn staff. So this is where we can actually award longevity. And this would be for the officers, detectives, sergeants, lieutenants, deputy chief, and chief. And you can see here, it's the same type of timeline here. Years of service calculated based on the date of hire, recognized in 2023 for continuous service. The last piece of this is called an onboarding stipend. So that if we do bring on someone who is brand new to the city, that we can give them some type of stipend to help offset the costs of whether it's relocation, additional equipment, uniforms, that type of thing. So that would be $1,000 onboarding stipend.
And one caveat to the budget impact on this one, the Badger Bounce Back funds that we've been coming to the council periodically throughout the year does provide the option for this. So if this plan does get approved, those onboarding stipends, which is essentially a hiring bonus, those would be worked through from a budget standpoint through the Badger Bounce Back grant that we got.
And then we included just some by Fair Labor Standards Act, or FLISA, there's potential impacts on overtime pay when we have something called retention bonuses. So we just kind of made sure we worked with legal on this to make sure that we are calculating the rates at the accurate amount. So this is the policy that we're looking to take to the council meeting on August 22nd. For approval, but we would like a recommendation from personnel to see if you think this is a good policy or to implement.
Thank you so much for the really thorough presentation and just laying out the challenges the department faces. I have learned a lot. I don't have a background in public safety, so I've learned a lot over the last few years and going on ride-alongs and speaking with the chief regularly. And it's incredible the amount of work that you all do and the challenges that you face in the city of our size. And I know that, you know, when you're short-staffed in a type of position like a police officer, the work has to get done. Things can't be delayed. The people have to be on their shifts. So that creates obviously a very unique challenge. And I can't imagine it myself, but I trust, you know, you saying that, you know, you face these challenges. I really appreciated you bringing earlier this year the bonuses for staff recommending new hires. I thought that was great. But given the fact that you have so much staff vacancy savings, I think this is a really great use for it. I think it's well justified. I think you laid out more than enough reasons for it. This looks like a really well laid out program, and I appreciated that it's been vetted by legal. My one question is that, I guess to clarify that this is going to be covered by vacancy savings from all those staff vacancies over the last year. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yep. So I confirmed that with Misty. So absolutely, it's about $274,000 that they would have, that would be absorbed through salary savings for this year.
Wow.
And there may be,
I thought the program.
and there may be more salary savings because we do have a projection of potential others that they may leave before the end of the year.
You know, and depending on how well this works out, you know, if we still have vacancies going into 2024, it might be a possibility potentially that maybe we come back to personnel and council and we look to take this on for the next year. I don't know, it's a thought because I do anticipate we may have more turnover because we have 5 individuals already eligible for retirement. So, you know, as people leave, it gets harder to want to stay because you get a lot added to your plate. So potentially.
That's my only fear is that we give bonuses this year and then people's memories are short and they're thinking ahead, you know, a year from then, thinking, am I getting another bonus? And they may or may not, depending on whether we've hired enough people, right?
Right.
But then, like the chief had mentioned, this is not the one all end all. There's multiple other steps that could be made to improve the retention of the officers that we currently have, all staff that we currently have. And I think that needs to be a point of emphasis moving forward beyond just this plan.
If we can recruit and get fully staffed, that will help with retention because they're not going to feel so overwhelmed. So that's on HR to really kind of work on getting fully staffed.
And it might be worthwhile, you know, to see if we can find it in the budget to preserve at least parts of this. You know, your service bonus or something would maybe be something that can help substantially with retention, even if you don't do the entire program again.
Exactly, right. The longevity goes a long way.
Yes.
Has there been have we done any studies to find out what it takes financially to onboard a new employee compared with, you know, what we might be able to retain given enough?
I don't know if we've ever done a deep dive on all of the steps along the hiring process, from just reviewing applications to setting up interviews to conducting interviews to assigning a single person to do a weeks-long background investigation. I know some of the medical drug screening as well as the psychological does have a tangible amount that we can say it costs, you know, $1,200, $1,500 to run people through those. Not to mention the cost of the academy, the living expenses if they have to go to some other part of the state, as well as their per diem every time. So, I mean, we could try to quantify that, but I don't think that's ever been actually conducted.
There's so many hours of staff time involved with recruiting. You know, whether it's interview panels, reviewing applications, all the steps that you mentioned. So yeah, we haven't actually measured that.
And we've been doing that nonstop since the beginning.
It's been nonstop.
For the last 2 years probably.
Even from the point where you're saying, yes, we're gonna hire somebody, you know, between that time and when they're a fully functioning, contributing.
Oh, absolutely, because when they're in the academy, they're getting paid field training during that entire time. They're contributing, but they don't count towards the schedule. So that's another 4 months that they're training with another officer. Then you gotta take into consideration the FTO pay that we're providing the FTO, the field training officer, during that time period as well. So once they become a full functioning member of the department, it could be 1.5 years.
1.5 years to 2 years before that officer can function by themselves. I do want to mention, this is a little bit out of topic, but Baker Tilly through one staffing department that is struggling, and I'll tell you that we probably consume, or I feel we consume more than 80% of that department's time, and that's HR. I don't know how Sarah can do that with her and one other part-time position. position because we do consume her time. And it's amazing that she's been able to keep up with the demands of the police department, let alone, I don't know what goes on with the fire department with that piece, but DPW, a lot of that goes through HR. And I don't know how Sarah's been able to handle that.
Well, and as we look to recruit, I mean, we really have to start looking outside of Dane County, and that's gonna take time and resources. And
Right.
Yeah, it's very clear that we face a lot of challenges, but really, thank you all for your continued service and to all the officers that have stuck it out these last couple years in particular with these vacancies. You know, thank you so much for your service. And really, I'm really excited that you brought this. I also, one more note, we did receive 5 emails from the public in strong support of this, which doesn't usually happen for personnel committee items. So I did just want to make a note of that. And yeah, I think if there's no more questions, I'm very happy to support this and we can take it to a vote, unless there's anything else, Bill.
Nope.
Any other last thoughts from anyone? Great. All right, so all in favor of the police retention bonus policy and procedures approval, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries, and that'll move on to finance and then council. Are we going to expect to see that in August
yep, you'll see it.
22nd?
You got it. It'll be a draft referral on August 22nd.
Great. Thank you all so much for coming out today.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda. Thank you. Next on the agenda is announcements. Is there anything to announce, Sarah? Or
I just wanted to mention the community night out this Wednesday from 5 to 8 at McKee Park Farm, or McKee Farms Park. So if you can attend, that'd be wonderful. It's a free event and it'll be well attended. And that's all I've got.
great.
Is that a Parks and Recreation
So
campground?
It is, I think.
yes. Very few people catch that. So great. So if announcements are over, we can go ahead and move to item number 7, adjournment. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned at 5:19 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gabriella.